Hansi the parakeet never saw it coming. One minute, Hansi was peacefully perched inside of his bird's cage, and the next minute, he was sucked in, washed up, and blown over. See, Hansi's problems began when his owner decided to vacuum out his bird cage. She stuck the vacuum attachment inside the cage, and about that moment, her phone made a buzz, and as a lot of us do, we look at the phone really quickly, and it distracted her. But when she turned back from the phone, Hansi was gone. She immediately pushed the phone to the side, looked inside the vacuum cleaner bag, and sure enough, Hansi was there, alive, but stunned. Since he was covered with dirt and debris, his owner grabbed him, raced down the hallway to the bathroom, where she stuck him under a faucet and ran cold water over him for 2 minutes. Well, she then realized that she had, her bird was now soaked and shivering, and so she did what any compassionate bird owner would do. She reached for her hair dryer and blasted the bird with hot air. Poor Hansi never knew what hit him. Several days later, a local interest reporter covering the story called to see how Hansi's recovery was coming along, and the owner said, "Well, Hansi doesn't sing much anymore. He just sort of sits there and stares." Now, of course, he just sits there and stares. I mean, that experience would stop any one of us from singing for joy. It's the same thing for us. You know, when things take a turn for the worst, it's never an easy adjustment. Maybe you can even relate to Hansi this morning. Perhaps you've gone through some tough times when things changed rather quickly, and not for the better. The factory unexpectedly closed. Your significant other left you abruptly. The police were standing at your doorstep. Someone close to you died. Your investments took a nosedive. At that time, it felt like your song is gone, and it seems like it would never come back. Maybe you're also struggling with finding reasons to just celebrate it all or to sing. Well, if so, you're not all that different from Jesus' followers on that morning right after his crucifixion. Things have been going great for them. Over the past 3 years, they had traveled with Jesus, seen him perform miracles, learned immense wisdom, experienced positive change, but now he had been crucified and gone, just killed and gone. I mean, talk about experiencing some of the worst in life. If a reporter had asked Jesus' followers how they were doing after all this, we might have heard them say something like, "They don't sing much anymore. They just sort of sit there and stare." But then something happened, and the world would never be the same. We hear in today's gospel reading that one disciple, Mary Magdalene, remained beside Jesus' tomb by herself after it was discovered to be empty. And what else did she do? Well, Jesus' body was gone, and she first assumed it had been stolen. Not only had his life been taken, but now his body was taken. And so she was upset and saddened and distraught. She felt helpless and joyless, unable to sing anymore. Jesus had done so much for her, but now he was dead, and she couldn't even visit his grave because the body wasn't there. We learned earlier in the story in Luke chapter 8 that Jesus had actually cast 7 demons out of Mary Magdalene. Contrary to what people assumed, she was not a prostitute. That's not in the Bible. Instead, it tells us she was a wealthy woman who followed Jesus around, listened to his teaching, and funded his ministry. And now, she stood in the garden where Jesus had been buried in a tomb, all alone, wondering what was happening, just sort of sitting there and staring. But suddenly a man appeared and began to speak to her. She thought it was the gardener. That is, until he spoke her name. "Teacher," she responded. It was Jesus, her teacher, her friend, her rabbi, her Lord. Unlike Hansi the bird, Mary was able to sing again. Her song of joy was restored. She had an entire conversation with Jesus at first, but didn't know it was him until he said her name. That is the moment she recognized him. And that is how it can be for us too. We can be trapped in moments in our lives where we've lost our song, where we've lost the ability to rejoice and be filled with joy. But then Jesus calls our names and calls us out of darkness. Jesus calls out our names so we can sing our songs again. This morning, Jesus is calling out each and every one of your names as well. That is what he's doing right now. You know, if you've ever seen the movie Schindler's List, you might remember there was this clandestine wedding that took place one night in the barracks. The marriage was between 24-year-old Joseph Bau, who was a prisoner, and Rebecca Tenenbaum. She was a manicurist for the ruthless Nazi who oversaw their camp, Glasgow prison camp. And later, the Nazis decided to close Platz down and move everybody to Auschwitz. Oskar Schindler, got permission to open a munitions plant in Czechoslovakia, and he was determined to take his workers with him. Late in the game, because of a favor owed to her by some prominent locals, Rebecca got to add a single name, one name only, to the list of people who would go to the munitions plant. If a person went to Auschwitz, they would almost surely die. If they went to the munitions plant, they'd work very hard. It wouldn't be easy, but they would probably survive. Rebecca got to send one single person, and so she chose Joseph. What's even more amazing about that story is they both survived the war. They were reunited, and they lived to be married for 54 years, largely in part because Rebecca was willing to sacrifice herself so her husband might live. Jesus did the same thing. He sacrificed himself to add a name to the list of who would inherit eternal life. You know, I wonder, if I were given one name, how could I even choose? Well, here's the beauty of the story. Jesus didn't add just one name. He added an unbelievable number of names, more than we could imagine. The beauty is, he's added our names to this list. He gave his life for all of creation. And that is what we're remembering today in this encounter between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. It's what we remember when he calls her name, calls her out by name. Mary was one of his followers. He knows all of his followers by name. He knows your name too. He knows who we are. Now, we may not recognize him at first. After all, Mary didn't, and she had been walking with him for 3 years. But that doesn't mean that he isn't trying to call out to us. So let's listen. How is Jesus calling you by name this morning? Are you standing beside a tomb, saddened by a loss? Perhaps Jesus is calling you back to joy and to this life. Are you heartbroken over the loss of something in your life, or a relationship, a friendship, a marriage? Perhaps Jesus is calling you by name and inviting you into a relationship with him and better relationships with other people. Do you feel afraid and confused because your life is spinning out of control? Perhaps Jesus is calling your name and trying to show you stability and support and a life of balance. Do you wonder what your purpose is going to be going forward from here? Maybe because a job went away. Well, if so, know that God has a purpose for each one of us greater than we could ever imagine. If we believe in Jesus, if we trust him, we can begin to hear him call out our names. It might not be as obvious as a man standing right in front of us looking like a gardener as it did for Mary Magdalene. However, it might not be that hard either. Like Mary, we too can have our songs restored. We can experience new life right here and now. We can hear Jesus calling us into a better future. We can experience the power of new life and of resurrection on this side of death as well. We don't have to just sit there and stare, because Jesus is calling our names to sing a song, and sometimes an even better song. Amen.